Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be talking a bit about data link and macro based automation to manage the lower thirds that you may have to do in more complex types of events you may cover. But before we get there, I want to remind everybody that we will be taking in live callers. If anybody'd like to join us on the show, share some of your experiences, some of your knowledge about how you've set up, sort of dynamic lower thirds in complex environments, we'd love to have you on the show. Also, please feel free to comment. Anything you want to share is always welcome. We love the engagement. And since this is the day after Thanksgiving in the US, I appreciate everybody who's joining us live that, is giving up their Black Friday to actually spend some time geeking out about live streaming. So I appreciate that. So let me set a little context first before we get into the specifics of what we're doing, what we're going to show on this program. When we were asked to participate in the Stream Geeks event, one of the things that we knew we'd have to do in switching that production was we'd have to manage all the lower thirds for a variety of panels that were going to be speaking. So panels had hosts and a number of expert guests, and we knew these panels were coming every hour, and there were going to be effectively 6 full panels and then ad hoc speakers along the way. So we needed to have a mechanism in place that would let us manage those lower thirds, not just technically, but also operationally from the workflow. How is it that we could simplify what the technical director, the person that was actually switching the show, needed to do to call up these lower thirds and make sure that everything was set right? So we decided that we would use both Datalink, which I'll talk about in a minute, as well as automation, different macro based automation techniques to manage the lower thirds a panel at a time, effectively giving us a way for any given panel to set the full range of lower thirds we'd need for that panel. So let's get started. And I'll talk a bit about first what is data link. So data link it's a TriCaster specific capability, though there are variants that exist in most other switching programs. But what it will let you do is it will let you take data from a variety of sources outside and inside the system and integrate those into lower thirds and other graphics. So this gives you the ability now to take titles or names or venue information and update that dynamically using a variety of mechanisms. So the data you can get from Datalink comes from an array of different types of sources. There's external sources, things that would be coming from outside the TriCaster and then be brought inside, as well as internal sources, basically metadata that exists around things that are already running inside your TriCaster. So from the external side, uh, the one that we used, and probably a fairly popular one for most people using Datalink, is a file watcher. The ability to create a file that has all of the data link values you're going to want to use, like all, in this case, all our names, lower thirds, panel titles, things like that, and place those in a file that sits in a watch folder. So anytime that file changes inside the watch folder, TriCaster recognizes that, picks it up, and updates all the graphics that could be associated with that dynamically. The other piece is you can actually have things which work with databases as well. So you can set up, it works with MySQL, and you basically set it up as a range of queries. That way, you can have a database sitting somewhere on your network accessibly and use other types of tools, applications to update the data in that database. And then that too would just be dynamically recognized and displayed. The other is something called RSS, really simple syndication. That may be a little less popular than it was at one time, but This is basically the way news organizations, weather stations, anything, any sort of website that has to update information on a dynamic basis, that tended to be how they shared that information out with other potential consumers of that information, technical consumers downstream. Uh, the other thing, and this is something that anybody who is in sports definitely deals with, it's external hardware controllers. And this would be things, Scorebot, there's a range of other ones that specifically focus on pulling information out of, things like a scoreboard where you have timers, you have scores, you have goals, you have, periods, whatever it is that you would be tracked normally in a sporting event, that information can now be brought in and be used to populate a dynamic scoreboard in CG that you'd have inside the TriCaster. And the other thing externally is there is a Chrome plugin you can use that lets you clip data out of web pages. And you can send that in to be dynamically picked up by Datalink. And again, another really easy way to bring in external data sources into your production. But there's also internal data sources. Uh, so time. This is something where you want to put a bug up that shows, what time it is, anything that you want to do, which could have countdown. So for instance, if you want to do something that runs up to the next event, when is the next event going to take place? That information is all settable inside the TriCaster. Works with dates, and it also works with, sort of your program sources. So you can name each source and you can add comments. So if you wanted to do something where you simply said, take whatever program source is being selected, so whatever camera, and you could hard code in that the data for the person that would be on the camera and their title or their function in the presentation. And again, this gives you a simple way to pull that information in. And then if it changes, you're just really changing it in the comment section of, that input, and then everything downstream would be able to pick that up. You also have information about session names. So this could be something that would be more if you wanted to do something internally where you could make sure that I'm monitoring the correct session, have the session name and other details about the TriCaster session that's running. That information is all available. Again, very useful in a control room setting. Media players. If you play a media clip, each clip that you have can be named and can have comment information. So this gives you, if I just bring up video that I brought in from other places, all that information can be baked into it and can be brought up to label what people are watching if you wanted to add that to a production. So what we did though in looking at all this is we used a file that had all of the information we needed for each panel, who was in the panel, and what their company affiliation was. So basically, it's just an Ascii file. So this would be a file that we'd place in the watch folder for the production we were running. And if you can look here, I think the mouse is showing. So what we have is a name equals and then a value. So this is really just name value pairs that we're bringing in. This is something I can type. Don't let the underscores and, this was just a way for us to keep track of what everything is. But it is really as simple as type a name, temperature equals 70 degrees, that sort of thing. I could put that in there. And then anytime I ask the system to show temperature, it would look at that value and say, okay, the temperature now I'm just going to display 70 degrees. So very simple mechanism, but it actually has a lot of power in it. So the way we set this up is we set this up for each panel session. So we have session 1, 2. In this case, for this demo, we'll do 4 panels. But this is everything associated with panel 1, session 1. Their 0 reference, which is sort of the geeky side of us. That's sort of how we start out with these things. And then we have a title, what is the name of the session? What are they going to cover? And then we have who is the host of that session. And if they have, a special title, we just had host in here, you could put that in. And then we have for the 4 guests, their name and their title. And this is all that we needed to do. But we repeated this for session 00, 01, 02, 03. So the file we have is basically just a longer version of this file with these name value pairs in it. So let me show you how we would actually go about using this in setting this up for a production. So if you give me a second here, I'm going to switch over to, let's see. Okay, so here, so what I want to show you is how you would do this on the TriCaster itself. So I've just called up, this is our live TriCaster screen for the show we're running here. And let me switch over here, and I'm going to go over to, if you look over here, to buffers. And what I've done to get this to work is I put a lower third into a buffer. So let's just take this one. This is where I do the name and the title. And so I have my graphic, and then inside, this is where, if I just wanted to, I could have typed the name out, just the same thing I did in that file. But the difference here now is that if you look, what I have here is a special tag we can put in, which is %, which is how you indicate this is Datalink. You start your title name, the text you're typing in, with %. And then it's just pulling out from session 0, host, name, and it displays the name. And so it's actually reading this dynamically as we do this. And then the same with host. We can go here, and it shows the session host and now the host title. So very simple on this front. And then what we have over here, if you look, is something called presets. These are the title, the name and title of everybody that's on this session 0 panel. So if I were to call up any of these others, you'll see that now it's changed down here. And as I go through this, if you look here, now this has the, oh, well, it has the data link keys that we need in all this. And so any of these things that I call up, if I switch them around and move between them, I can actually load and unload different titles here. So we're going to go into this in more detail. But I think the key thing to understand is that we have the ability using Datalink to set up names and titles, and then to store those into presets that we have over here. So let me go back now, and I will sort of give you a little bit more detail on what we're doing in there. So let me turn off the... So it makes everybody feel a lot more comfortable in the control room when I'm not messing around on the TriCaster here. So give me a second, and we'll get up to where we should be. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what we had to do to set all of these things up. So because we were going to be running through multiple panel sessions, we wanted the ability to load up, like I showed when I was pressing some buttons here, to load up different panels into that buffer. So all the presets were lined up with the panels. So all we do here is we come back and this is the macro that we actually set up for this. So when I press, in this case, this would be for, I think this is our panel 0. What we are doing is we are setting the title, the title set line property, which is the text that goes into each one of those lines you saw. So the name or the title, the text that actually goes into there. So we say set the text for line 0, which was the name. It's going to be a text value, and the value is, this is the session data link variables now. So I'm simply putting in the data link code that I'd need to pull in the right value. And so what we did to make this work is if I would say set everything up for session 0, it would run this macro and it would load all of the data from the file we have set up, and it would, for each one of these, it would set them into preset 1, uh, and then sort of run through preset 1, preset 2, 3, and 4. So this was effectively setting up the host for the the panel host, and then we also had each one of the panel guests, and it let us do all that with a simple macro push. And then all we needed to do, if we wanted to call up a macro, to call up a lower third associated with any of the guests that were on the panel, all we needed to do was call another macro that just said, load into our lower third this preset for, in this case, this would be guest 1. So we're just calling up for each one of the presets that are set up. So it's a very simple mechanism now. You have Datalink, which is reading data from a file we have set up in the system with all the lower third info. We populate all the presets for a given panel using that file and a macro, and then using another macro, we can say which guest am I going to bring the lower third up for, and just simply populate that correctly. So it's a very streamlined mechanism where before we would have had 35 different titles and names we needed to deal with. Now we get it down to, for each panel, 5 with 5 button pushes. So let me see if I can, let me show you something over here now. If we look at the, what I have here is a X keys, and this was set up for what we were doing for the show. And if you look here, we have across the top, these were the different panels that we had available. So there was an intro panel, and then each one of the individual panels in the keynote. So in this case, we just set up for the first 4. So let me press this. So what I've said is I'm in my first panel here, and I'll call up, let me call up this lower third first. So this is the name of the panel we had. So we called this panel the show introduction panel. And now I can take that down. And these are the different people that are in that panel. So if I wanted to, you see along here now, I have all the guests. So by simply pressing a button now, I can jump around based on whoever is talking, and I have their lower third loaded and displayed. I also, and I'm going to do this deliberately as I keep this up, if I want to switch to panel 2, what you'll see when I press this button is you'll see everything down here get loaded in. So now I've loaded in for the second panel all these names, and it again works the exact same way. By just pressing and selecting this, same button push as I do here, I now call up all the same names for the second panel, and so on. So each one of these things will work across exactly the same way. And now if I go over here and say, well, what's this last panel about? Well, that's the panel about future opportunities. What's this panel? This is product development. This is marketing discussion. So this now has taken what would be a fairly complex number of lower thirds and simplified it to a 2-step selection. Select the panel and then select the individuals that I want to show the lower thirds for. So, I mean, I think this is actually pretty interesting right here. What I'm going to do, though, is I want to show you one more thing that I think is also pretty cool here. So let's see. If I come here, we are in the marketing discussion. Okay, so let me do the following. If we can switch to show this screen here, this is the actual text that we have in that Ascii file I talked about for Datalink. Now, I am going to call up, let's just go here, call this up. So this is the lower third I have. And if you can see here, it's going to be a little hard. But this is the different text we have for the second session, and it's marketing discussion. So if I actually wanted somebody to be sitting on the side and just said marketing overview, I can now save that. Oh, for some reason let me save it here. Okay, so as soon as I save this, now it switches to marketing overview. So I have the ability not just to do this through macros, but you could have somebody editing a file dynamically or make changes dynamically to try to work around, anything that comes in last minute. And that's one of the things we keep talking about, having the flexibility to respond to things that come up, when you're live in the event or when things are dynamically changing. One guest is going to join another panel, somebody where you have a name spelled wrong and that nobody knew that. You can actually just go in and make this change dynamically while you're live and, be able to handle any of these types of changes during a show. So I know this is a shorter show today, but I just felt that there's a lot that you can probably take away from this for some of the ways that you're going to think about managing more complex processes that sort of repeat in substance but change in detail from one segment of a live event to another. So hopefully you found this useful. I I'm very appreciative that everybody took the day after Thanksgiving to join us. Even if you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, formally like we do in this country, it's something that I think all of us can recognize we have something to be thankful for. So, clearly, I said this yesterday in a post, but we're very thankful for all the support we've gotten from everybody here in the Streaming Alchemy community. And that's something that we want to just recognize. So thank you all for being a part of this show and a part of this community. That's something really important to us. So for our next show, we're going to have an interview with the folks over at Bird Dog. So we're going to be talking cameras, encoders, and a whole lot more. They have a lot of cool stuff going on. So we're going to get to spend some time with them. And I'll have to give a shout out in advance to them because they're going to be based in Australia. So the time they're going to have to get up to join us on this show is pretty cruel. And I think it's going to be on a Saturday morning. So this will be, definitely worth tuning in for. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to hang around after this show. I may not have mentioned it at the beginning now, think of it. But we're going to hang around after this show in case anybody has any questions or, wants to share anything. So please, we'll go dark and then we'll come back up. Feel free to post questions in the comments and I'll respond or give us a call in. You can always jump in on our, Streaming Alchemy call-in facility. So if you want to become part of the show that way, that would be great too. But so we'll go dark, and I'll see you in a minute. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye. Hello, everyone. So we're here, and we'll just be hanging around a bit. I figure everybody has a lot going on, whether it's with relatives or shopping or just sneaking back in for another piece of pie, whatever it is you're doing right now. I recognize that. So it's very possible that this is going to be a pretty short after show as well. But one thing that I figure I can share, since it is Black Friday, if you are looking at getting Stream Decks, I know that there's a lot of sales that Elgato places at least their 15 button Stream Decks and their 6-button Stream Deck, so the Stream Deck Mini, on sale on Black Friday. So if that was something you were thinking of adding to your studio, today would probably be a pretty good day to jump online or visit your local Best Buy or where it is you shop for gear, and pick one of those up. You'll save a little bit of money there. So, but again, this is what we covered today. I thought had a couple of interesting points. Uh, the real overview, though, I think, out of this is that you can take anything that can be broken up into repeatable segments and use automation to simplify the workflow around that. So even though it would certainly be possible to, in this case with lower thirds or other types of information, to create each one of those individually as a graphic and bring them up, and we had enough buffers on the TriCaster and enough presets, that can still create some complexity when you're thinking about what's going to be going on for the person switching that show. So some of this can be things that you think about, not just what technically can I do, but how does what I'm doing impact workflow? And that's probably one of the takeaways I'd like to emphasize from the show, that it's not just what can you do technically, but what makes sense from an operational point of view. And we've always said this, it's sort of our mantra, everything you think about in advance is one less thing you have to think about when you're live. And that really matters. You can end up definitely getting overwhelmed in a live environment. There are a lot of things that are going on. And if you do not consider that, you know, that there could be a crisis taking place, with cameras, with wiring, with, your stream out computer for encoding. Any of those things can happen. So, simplify everything you can operationally when you think of the production workflow. So, so that's really it. I guess everybody is off as they should be, enjoying family and spending some quality time relaxing. So I guess we'll wrap this up. But again, next week we'll be on with Bird Dog, which should be a great show. And if I don't get to talk to anybody till then, take care. Thanks for joining us.